Alright everyone, we start off today talking about the latest Demstraction, which is that the Biden administration, they can't talk about the economy, the border, crime, decreasingly can they even talk about foreign diplomacy even related to Ukraine. Is try to hush it up every time they're sending billions of inflationary taxpayer dollars to other nations. Since they have literally nothing to talk about, guns is now back on schedule. You'll note that there have been a number of large-scale shootings over the last years. Only occasionally do they get any attention, and it fits a very narrow profile of where the shooting occurs, who does the shooting, usually what weapon is involved as well, and the political climate. Of course, if there's no election going on, you're not going to bring it up as an issue because then you're going to rile up the conservatives, and you've already got a problem where they're outpacing you in new registrations, total registrations. Republicans are way ahead in turnout in many of the pre-midterm primaries, showing that there's a huge difference, an enormous differential, I believe, and I think this is standard common knowledge, as far as enthusiasm goes. There's quite a big gap there. You need look no further than the primaries for Attorney General in Texas. It wasn't even close. So now Biden, because he's decided, hey, I'm getting slamma-jammed on literally every issue right now, including my mental health, beginning to resemble Ronald Reagan a la the mid-90s, I suppose. It's not a good place to be. Now he's calling for more anti-gun extremism. And it's a broad sort of multi-platform attack on the Second Amendment. The problem is it goes even further because a couple of these suggestions attack other amendments as well, namely states' rights and also the concept of equal protection under the law, potentially subjugate to the right to keep and bear arms as well as participate in a militia. First, a ban on high-capacity magazines. Now, of course, if you know anything about guns, really what you mean is normal capacity magazines. 30 is fairly standard. 10 rounds, which is what Biden appears to think is the topmost appropriate level of number of bullets in any firearm, is actually a low-capacity firearm. There are many handguns. Again, it's not an uber-scary AR-15. Don't worry. It's not firing super-duper baby killer 100,000 millimeter rounds at 100 rounds per millisecond or something. It's a handgun. It's a topical self-defense gun. It's interesting how he started rambling about 9mm bullets the other day, showing again that the people crafting, potentially at least, preliminary gun policy, in many cases are completely oblivious about everything related to guns. So there is no high-capacity magazine. You could make in theory, you could say a 100-round drum is high capacity. And you probably aren't using that for hunting. I'm just going to point that out. That would be honest. But 20 and 30 round magazines are standard. 10 rounds, in fact, and this was pointed out in testimony pertinent to the attempts at gun control here. It's pointed out the other day by one of the Republican members of Congress that there are certain types of guns. Again, not the AR-15, etc. You can get a 10-round, magazine for that. There are certain handguns for which there is no low-capacity magazine. Certainly the more modular ones, yes, in general, you're going to have different sizes. In order to modify, for example, certain types of handguns that currently they take generally 15-round magazines, if there is no smaller magazine available, you'd have to either alter the magazines you have, or a manufacturer, for a single model of a gun, potentially, would have to begin manufacturing low-capacity magazines. That would be an economic problem. It'd be a logistical nightmare. It's also, by the way, completely unenforceable. Then we move on to the concept of raising the age of a gun purchaser for certain types of weapons, showing, again, they know nothing about firearms, to 21 as opposed to 18. Here's where it gets even worse. Yes, this violates the Second Amendment rights of those citizens. They've attained the age of majority. They have the right to participate in the militia, which of course is the population at large, able to muster, of voting age. And there you run into a problem. They can vote, but they've been retroactively stripped of the ability to own certain types of weapons. Possibly by not even legislation, but an attempted executive action. It's blatantly unconstitutional, though. you would be relegating 18 to 20-year-olds into second-class citizen status for the purposes of the Second Amendment. If it were to stand, it would be immediately injuncted by a court, and I believe SCOTUS would toss it out. What would happen, if it were upheld, is that you would effectively set a legal precedent where any other constitutional rights could be no longer guaranteed to those individuals under the age of 21. To make any form of comprehensive constitutional argument for a raise on the age to purchase firearms, and of course this has nothing to do with wielding them or owning them, only point of purchase, the background check and gun store thing, you would have to raise the voting age. That would effectively remove 18 to 20-year-olds from the militia at large. 20 would be the new 18. 17, 20-year-olds would effectively become minors under such a premise. You would need a constitutional amendment in order to actually have this happen. It's clearly not going to occur. The odds of, by the way, any of these things passing muster in the Senate is extremely low. I think there aren't enough cuck Republicans in the Senate to actually join with the Democrats on this. A really, really watered down measure that, the Republicans are more likely to try to arm the teachers into the mix and end, the anti-gun zones as far as schools and stuff go. I would support these measures, by the way. The teachers should be armed because clearly, in some cases, the police, like in Uvalde, are not competent to actually protect kids. The teacher will automatically fire back because they're being fired at themselves. Even if they viscerally hate the kids, they're still going to try to take out the shooter. Then, you have an assault weapons ban. Now, we've already done this before. It was not grandfathered in for pre-existing weapons. The second that Biden suggests this, gun sales go through the roof, along with the cost of guns and ammo, and that's really the only thing that'll be accomplished. There will be even more assault weapons in more hands across the United States. Millions of excess sales, probably. The Senate especially moves very, very slowly on legislation, even though they're trying to fast-track it. The other problem with the assault weapons ban is that the language involved is so vague. In some cases, this is a problem with the legislation. You're not really properly defining what that is. Assault weapon, the proper legal definition, is a select fire weapon, an actual military weapon. But they've been banned for decades for civilian sale and usage. They don't exist in civilian hands with the exception of some older collector's items, which cost an arm and a leg and require a tax stamp and all sorts of other regulation because they fall under the premises of the 1986 ban, I believe. Can't be imported, manufactured, etc. The closest approximation that is actually available are sporting rifles. They are not select fire. They look topically similar to actual assault weapons. Well, just because two things look similar doesn't mean that they're of similar caliber. That's like saying, well, this Rolex and this fake Rolex that I got for $10 in the back alley off of Skid Row, they're basically the same thing because they look the same to me. I think you'll find that they don't function quite the same way. Maybe. It'd be funny if the fake Rolex actually lasted longer. I wouldn't even be surprised in some cases with high-end luxury goods. By the way, how would the assault weapons ban accomplish anything? We've tried it before. All of these things at the state level have already been tried on and off anyway in certain blue states. None of them have a meaningful impact on gun crime anyway. That's because a lot of the gun deaths in the United States are suicides. A lot of the school shootings, by the way, are negligent discharge and suicide. Mass shootings have exploded in number mainly because they changed the definition of how many people needed to die before it qualified as a mass shooting. So, yeah, of course it looks like we've got a gun violence epidemic. The problem's getting terrible. Crime is rising in the U.S., largely, in truth, relegated to gang-related activity being exacerbated by an open border, an open southern border, number one, and lax enforcement, number two, in certain blighted cities that are run by people who are getting more and more woke and refuse to prosecute people for many crimes. Just look at San Francisco if you need an example, or Portland for that matter, Seattle, a few of these other blighted locations that really, if they got nuked, nobody would really care. Just saying. Then, you've got an attempt to make gun manufacturers civilly liable if the guns are used in shootings. Why would one industry out of all of the other industries be singularly targeted, especially the industry pertinent to an actual constitutional right explicitly granted to people, or enumerated? Sorry, I know the purists out there would crucify me if I don't use exactly the right puristic terminology. So, enumerated. A right has been specifically enumerated. It is required that in order to exercise that right, guns be manufactured, ammo be milled, and so forth. Why would that one particular industry, therefore, be subjugate to additional civil liability? We don't do that for automotive manufacturers. Way more people die in deaths related to vehicular homicide and DUI and all of these other nasty things. People die on the road every single day, and some parts of the country, and Vermont has this problem, there's a couple locations in Burlington that are almost suicide to bother to traverse, like the highway interchange. Oh boy, they have regular accidents there. We don't say the person who manufactured your car is liable because you ran someone over. The only exception would be if the vehicle was improperly functioning. It wasn't well regulated, wink wink. The vehicle was a lemon. It had a defect. Maybe the brand has a defect and they didn't recall them yet. Maybe the specific vehicle was negligently made. Oh, the brakes were faulty. We put the wrong kind of brakes on this vehicle. They weren't rated to be able to actually stop the vehicle. We took the brakes, somehow Sid the engineer screwed up again. He took a brake system off of a subcompact car and put it on the Humvee. And it doesn't work. Well, the manufacturer can be sued. Likewise, if your gun explodes in your face because the manufacturer built a model that was prone to exploding in your face, you'd potentially have a civil case. You wouldn't be immune from that. But if you take a gun that is perfectly well functioning and you do terrible things with it, put two and two together. Why wouldn't we extend this to knife manufacturers? Why wouldn't we extend it to basically anything capable of causing harm? You could kill someone with a sheaf of printer paper, tie him down and give him a bunch of paper cuts, death by, well, in that case, probably 10,000 cuts. Can you sue the paper manufacturer for having produced this terrible, deadly weapon by which you were tortured for 12 hours before you finally died? No. Well, you can. You can start a frivolous legal suit. It won't go anywhere. Now, as for this material passing, not likely. The Republicans are prone to cuck, and they get very nervous about things, but I don't know that there are enough specific Republican votes in the Senate where the Republican would get reelected if they did cuck, in seats, in some cases, that are currently up in the midterms. I don't know that that's exactly the kind of legislation that they'd likely cuck on to go along with, because their constituents have moved more and more pro-gun, actually, over the last few years. Really, in the wake of the 2000s, the public's attitude towards gun control has shifted massively in the Republicans' direction, has gone past them in some cases. I don't see the Republicans pushing for the removal of the NFA. If they do cuck on this, and you end up with unconstitutional federal-level gun control, it enters the courts, it becomes another long, drawn-out, expensive judiciary battle, one that doesn't need to actually take place. If it doesn't pass, you can look for Biden to tentatively attempt executive orders. They'll be shot down by the court system, because it's quite clear. The executive branch cannot unilaterally fiddle with the Second Amendment, even less so than the federal government at large through legislation, and them even less than the states at large under the auspices of the supremacy of states under the 10th Amendment. None of these proposals should be adopted. Any Republicans supporting them or even taking place in negotiations on the gun crime epidemic should not be reelected. That's about all. Peace out.